In the 6th century BC, a dark mystery surrounded the destiny of three great cities of the ancient world. Jerusalem, the holy city that people saw as the spiritual heart of the earth, was burned and destroyed. Babylon, ruler of the largest empire the world had ever known, disappeared in a single night, swallowed up by history. Nineveh, a huge city of 600,000 people, a super city at a time when London was still only a small village, was destroyed so completely that no one could even find its place for 2,500 years. These were not weak or small cities. They were strongholds of power, culture, and religion. What could cause such sudden and complete destruction, able to erase these giants of the past? A riddle whispers through the centuries, daring us to discover its cause. Corinth, the city of moral decay. Built on the narrow land bridge that connects mainland Greece to the Peloponnese, Corinth thrived as a busy center of trade and sin. Its location gave it control over sea traffic between the Ionian and Aegean seas. The city had two ports, Lycaeum and Cenchreae, which welcomed sailors, traders, and travelers from across the Mediterranean. This made it a meeting place of cultures, but also a place where immorality grew strong. Corinth became rich not only through trade, but also because it was known as a city of pleasure and indulgence. Sin itself became a product to be sold. Rising above the city stood the Acrocorinth, crowned by the temple of Aphrodite, the goddess of love and desire. In that temple, over 1,000 sacred prostitutes called hieroduloi performed acts of sexual worship, mixing lust with religion. These long rituals of sexual worship, sometimes lasting for days, were not just allowed, but celebrated as holy acts, attracting people from faraway lands. The city was so corrupt that the phrase, "to live like a Corinthian," became famous across the Roman world as meaning to live in shameful immorality. When the Apostle Paul came to Corinth around AD 50, he found a church struggling to free itself from the sinful culture of the city. In 1 Corinthians 5:1, he was shocked by a case where a man lived openly with his stepmother, something even the pagans thought wrong, yet the church treated it as nothing. Corinth's streets overflowed with sin, and its ports were gateways for sailors seeking forbidden pleasures. Paul's letters to the Corinthians show his tireless work to purify this new Christian community, warning them not to take part in rituals he compared to sharing in communion with demons, 1 Corinthians 10:20-21. But Corinth was only one example of the moral corruption of the ancient world. Athens, the throne of proud philosophy. Athens was called the birthplace of philosophy and democracy, the intellectual jewel of the ancient world. Its plazas and marble temples echoed with the debates of teachers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, who shaped Western thinking. On the Areopagus, the pursuit of knowledge was celebrated as the highest achievement of human reason. But behind this picture of wisdom was a deep emptiness. In Acts 17:23, Paul, while walking through Athens, found an altar with the words, "To the unknown God." This showed their own confession. They had not found the true God. Athens, for all its wisdom, had failed to know him. While Athenians spent their lives discussing new ideas, Acts 17:21, they also filled their city with idols and altars to false gods. Hundreds of statues filled Athens, proving their idolatry. The Parthenon, dedicated to Athena, became a symbol of their pride, where human wisdom tried to stand against God's revelation. Paul challenged this thinking directly, preaching the resurrection, but he was mocked by Epicurean and Stoic philosophers who thought the message of the cross was foolish, 1 Corinthians 1:23. Athens became the symbol of human pride, lifting up human logic, but refusing to bow before eternal wisdom. Ephesus, the capital of occult practices. Ephesus was a shining city of Asia Minor, famous as the center of magic and dark practices in the ancient world. It was like a spiritual Las Vegas. At its heart stood the great temple of Artemis, Diana, one of the 7 wonders of the world. It was a massive structure decorated with beautiful sculptures and towering columns, but it was more than architecture. It was a center of dark rituals. Priestesses there performed bloody ceremonies, and merchants sold magical charms and cursed amulets that promised wealth, power, or safety. The streets were filled with sorcerers, fortune-tellers, and those who spoke with the dead, all competing for customers in a city hungry for supernatural power. Magic books, called the Ephesia Grammata, were so valuable that they sold for enormous sums. Acts 19:19 tells of a great moment when new Christians burned these books worth 50,000 silver coins, about 137 years of wages for a worker. This showed their powerful change of heart. Paul's ministry in Ephesus lasted more than 2 years, Acts 19:10, and his preaching caused a huge confrontation with the city's dark powers. Many turned to Christ, and their new faith threatened the businesses of local craftsmen, especially those who made silver idols of Artemis. A silversmith named Demetrius stirred up a riot, and the crowd shouted for 2 hours, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians," Acts 19:34. This revealed how deeply the city was addicted to its magical practices. Jerusalem, the holy city, turned unfaithful. Jerusalem, the most holy city in Bible history, was chosen as the place where God's presence would dwell. In Solomon's time, the temple shone with gold and held the Ark of the Covenant, meant to be a light of God to all nations. But over time, Jerusalem became a city of betrayal. In Ezekiel 16:15, God said that Jerusalem had used her beauty to prostitute herself, giving herself to idols and sinful acts with strangers. Shockingly, even inside the temple itself, priests allowed cult prostitutes, turning God's holy house into a place for pagan sexual acts. The sin went even deeper. Idols of false gods were placed inside the temple next to the Ark of the Covenant, an insult to God himself, Jeremiah 7:30. The darkest time came under King Manasseh, 2 Kings 21:6. He practiced witchcraft, divination, and even sacrificed his own son in fire to pagan gods. Women in Jerusalem wept for Tammuz, a Mesopotamian god, while men turned their backs on God's altar and worshipped the sun, Ezekiel 8:14-16. Finally, God's presence left. Ezekiel 10:18 says, "The glory of the Lord departed from the temple, leaving the holy city empty and abandoned." Rome, the empire of blood and pleasure, Rome, the capital of the greatest empire of the ancient world, showed its power with massive monuments, wide roads, and unbeatable armies. But behind its glory was cruelty and love of pleasure. In the Colosseum, people cheered as gladiators killed each other, and Christians were torn apart by wild animals. The world's leading city turned violence into entertainment. Rome's rulers were also filled with sin. Emperor Nero burned parts of the city and blamed Christians, using them as human torches. Caligula turned the palace into a brothel. Domitian demanded people call him Lord and God. Revelation 17 describes Rome as a great harlot drunk with the blood of God's people. Rome's wealth was built on slavery, heavy taxes, and forcing people to worship Caesar. In Romans 1, Paul said that Rome's people gave themselves to shameful passions filled with idolatry and pride. Rome thought it would last forever, but it was already rotting from within, destroyed by its own sins. Alexandria, the city of corrupted wisdom, Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great, became a center of learning in the Mediterranean world. Its great library, the largest in history, kept hundreds of thousands of scrolls from many nations. Philosophers, mathematicians, and astronomers gathered there, proud to be guardians of wisdom, but their search for knowledge did not lead to God. Instead, it made them proud. Paul warned in Colossians 2:8, "Do not let anyone lead you astray with empty human philosophy instead of following Christ." In Alexandria, a false teaching called Gnosticism began. It mixed Christian ideas with pagan philosophy, corrupting the truth and leading many people away from God. Even the Jewish scholars there, who created the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, fell under Greek influence. Intellectual pride and endless debates divided them. Instead of shining with wisdom, Alexandria became a place of arrogance, where people trusted human reason more than God's revelation. Samaria, the capital of division and idolatry, Samaria was built as a rival to Jerusalem. King Omri bought a hill for silver and built the city as his capital, 1 Kings 16:24. But Samaria became a place of false religion and rebellion against God. Omri sinned worse than all kings before him, 1 Kings 16:25. His son Ahab made it even worse by marrying Jezebel, who brought Baal and Asherah worship into Israel. She supported 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah, filling Samaria with evil practices. 1 Kings 16:31-33. The city's greatest sin was twisting Israel's true worship. Jeroboam had already set up golden calves in Bethel and Dan, saying, "Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up from Egypt." 1 Kings 12:28. Samaria's religion mixed Yahweh worship with pagan practices, creating a fake religion that led Israel astray. Finally, in 722 BC, King Shalmaneser of Assyria conquered Samaria. The 10 northern tribes of Israel were carried away and disappeared from history, known as the Lost Tribes, 2 Kings 17:6. Samaria's false religion had destroyed whole tribes of God's people, something even Sodom had not done. Philadelphia, the city of fragile faith, Philadelphia, founded in the 2nd century BC and known as the city of brotherly love, was in Asia Minor and served as a cultural gateway between East and West. But the city lived with constant instability. It was built in a region of earthquakes, so people lived in fear, often forced to leave their homes when the ground shook. This physical weakness showed itself in their faith as well. Sometimes their trust in God was strong, and sometimes it was shaky. In Revelation 3:8, Jesus praised the small Christian church in Philadelphia. "You have little strength, yet you have kept my word." Still, the people of the city faced temptations from false religions and heavy cultural pressures. While cities like Jerusalem and Rome were corrupted by too much power, Philadelphia's danger was weakness and fear. Christ promised them an open door that no one could shut, but the warning was clear. Faith could not survive on shallow belief. They needed steadfastness and endurance against the spiritual earthquakes that tried to destroy their faith. Jericho, the fortress of corruption, Jericho, one of the oldest cities in the world, had double walls as high as 8 meters, making it seem impossible to defeat. But inside the strong walls, the culture was deeply corrupt. Archaeology shows Jericho had temples where cult prostitution was practiced. Women, including Rahab, worked as sacred prostitutes in worship to pagan gods. This corruption filled the whole city, turning it into a place of violence and abuse of strangers and travelers. In Joshua 2, Rahab, a prostitute, hid the Israelite spies. She confessed that she knew God was real and that Jericho was doomed, Joshua 2:9-11. Her choice was not just clever, it was an act of faith in Israel's God. When Jericho's walls fell, Rahab and her family were spared because of her faith, Joshua 6:17. Jericho was completely destroyed, and Joshua 6:26 declared a curse on anyone who tried to rebuild it. Unlike Samaria, which erased entire tribes, Jericho's fall left a story of redemption, because Rahab became part of the family line of Jesus, Matthew 1:5. Laodicea, the city of spiritual indifference. Laodicea, one of the richest cities of Phrygia, showed off its wealth proudly. Its textile industry and medical schools brought prosperity, especially its famous eye ointment. After a huge earthquake in the 1st century AD, Laodicea rebuilt itself without asking for help from Rome. Its people said they needed nothing, but spiritually they were poor. In Revelation 3:16-17, Christ warned them, "Because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold. I am about to spit you out of my mouth. You say, I am rich and need nothing, but you do not realize you are poor, blind, and naked. Laodicea became the picture of a church that confuses wealth with blessing. Their faith was lukewarm, without passion. Even their water supply symbolized this problem. It came from hot springs in Hierapolis, but by the time it reached Laodicea, it was only lukewarm. Like the water, their faith lacked life and strength. Revelation 3:20 says Christ stood outside knocking on the door because they had pushed him out with their pride. Tyre, the city that claimed to be divine, Tyre, the great trading city of the ancient world, was like the New York of antiquity. Its ships traveled from Spain to India, carrying gold, silver, spices, and slaves. Its colonies, like Carthage, spread its power across the seas, but its success made its king arrogant. In Ezekiel 28:2, God said to the king of Tyre, because you are proud and say, I am a god, I sit in the seat of gods in the heart of the seas, yet you are only a man, not a god. The king equated his wealth and power with divinity. Temples to Melkart and Astarte were filled with treasures, but worship there was really worship of wealth. Even prostitution in temples became a business for profit instead of religion. Isaiah 23:17 prophesied Tyre would return to selling herself to the nations. Ezekiel 27:13 records that Tyre even traded human lives as merchandise. God's judgment was announced in Ezekiel 26:21. I will make you a terror, and you will never be found again. In 332 BC, Alexander the Great destroyed Tyre, turning its proud island into ruins. Nineveh, the capital of cruelty. Nineveh, capital of the Assyrian Empire, was known as the City of Blood. The Assyrians used terror to conquer. Their records brag about impaling prisoners, burning children alive, and skinning enemies, then hanging their skins on city walls. Their gods, like Ishtar and Ninurta, demanded human sacrifice. Temple prostitution was not just for money, but part of their religion. Nahum 3:1-4 describes Nineveh as a bloody, lying, and deceitful city. In the 8th century BC, Jonah preached there, and the people repented for a short time, Jonah 3:5-10, but within a century they returned to even greater sin. Zephaniah 2:15 shows their pride. This is the city that said in her heart, I am, and there is none besides me. In 612 BC, the Babylonians and Medes destroyed Nineveh in a single night. It was wiped off the earth. Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim, the sister cities of depravity. These 4 cities in the Jordan Valley became infamous for their sins. Most people remember Sodom, but Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim were equally wicked. Deuteronomy 29:23 says, the whole land was burned with brimstone and salt, left barren forever. Ezekiel 16:48-49 explains their guilt: pride, too much food, and ignoring the poor. Zeboim was especially cruel, turning violence into law. Jewish tradition said travelers were robbed, judges were corrupt, and women were brutally mistreated. Josephus wrote that fire even erupted from the ground, consuming the cities completely. Genesis 19:4-5 records Sodom's most shocking sin. The men of the city surrounded Lot's house and demanded his angelic visitors to abuse them. It was more than immorality, it was open rebellion against heaven. Jude 7 says their unnatural desires brought eternal fire. God's response was final. Genesis 19:24-25 says, he rained fire and brimstone from heaven, wiping out the cities. Only Lot and his daughters escaped. Babylon, the mother of abominations. Babylon was more than a city. It was a system of rebellion. From the Tower of Babel to Nebuchadnezzar's empire, it taught the nations idolatry and pride. Revelation 17:5 calls it mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. Jeremiah 51:7 says, Babylon was a golden cup in the Lord's hand, making all the earth drunk. Its religion spread corruption everywhere. Its temples to Marduk and Ishtar were centers of prostitution and sacrifice. Even Daniel and his friends were forced to eat food offered to idols and trained to serve Babylon's system, Daniel 1:3-7. Babylon killed God's people. Revelation 17:6 says, "I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus." Isaiah 47:8-9 shows its arrogance, "I am, and there is none besides me." But its fall was certain. Revelation 18:2 declared, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great." In 539 BC, the Persians conquered it. Yet its spirit of rebellion continued, influencing corrupt systems throughout history. Sodom, the peak of perversion. Finally, Sodom became the symbol of human rebellion against God's natural order. Every man of the city, young and old, came together to attack God's angels in Lot's house. Genesis 19:4-5. Ezekiel 16:49 says their sin began with pride and selfishness. Jude 7 adds, "They chased unnatural desires, hinting at sins beyond human, possibly demonic." God destroyed Sodom and its sister cities with fire from heaven. Genesis 19:24-25. It was not a natural disaster. It was God's direct judgment. The word Sodom itself became a warning of divine judgment. The lesson of all these cities, from Jerusalem's betrayal to Babylon's pride, from Nineveh's cruelty to Rome's bloodlust, history shows the same truth. No city, empire, or culture built on arrogance, idolatry, and sin can stand against God's justice. Their ruins are not just history, they are warnings carved into time. But even in judgment, God always preserved a remnant. A Rahab, a faithful church in Philadelphia, a few who held fast. The rise and fall of these cities tell us one clear story. Human glory fades, but the kingdom of God lasts forever.